The article I chose is titled Self-Borrowing in the Music of Bernard Herrmann. In my presentation, I will prove that Herrmann did self-borrow in several of his pieces. I really want to touch on Herrmann's life because I believe it is what drove him to write the pieces he did and his overall denial of self-borrowing. To assess Herrmann's success in the film world, it is first necessary to understand the composer himself. Herrmann was a complex man who perceived weakness, his explosive temper, and intolerance of substandard musicianship, to name but two, often worked for rather than against him. He was an outspoken, highly literate, and intelligent man whose intense interest in film and the dramatic medium allowed him to write music rich in musical color, and which, when carefully placed under a dialogue track, increased the import of spoken word, lending dialogue a greater significance than it might otherwise have had. Herrmann was distrustful and intolerant of the musical opinions of others. This is demonstrated when he was asked in an article about the similarities of his pieces, and he explained that they were his style and that this is why they were similar. And this is common for composers. He was defensive when it came to his work, and it truly shows through several of his interviews. Now, I would like to show you three examples of famous compositions by Herrmann that were indeed self-borrowed. The prelude of the film score for Jane Eyre was later used in Act 4, Section 1 of Withering Heights. Did Herrmann's work on Withering Heights here influence his score for Jane Eyre? Or did the music for Jane Eyre predate its counterpart in Withering Heights? Regarding the similarities between the prelude for Jane Eyre and the passage in Act 4, Section 1 of the opera, it would be difficult to decide which is the one that influenced the other, since precise completion dates for the major sections are not marked in the score of Withering Heights. This leaves us with two speculations. Either the prelude theme of Jane Eyre was originally composed for Withering Heights when the opera was first conceptualized in the spring of 1943, and then used in the more immediate Jane Eyre project because it was a good fit for the film, or, since in 1943 the Withering Heights project was hardly more than a concept, music written specifically for Jane Eyre was incorporated into Withering Heights as the opera score eventually took shape. The following clips present sections from both the prelude from the score of Jane Eyre and Act 4, Section 1 of Withering Heights. The London cue in the film The Ghost and Mrs Muir was the source for the water skiing music which followed the main title of Tender is the Night, entitled The Beach. The material is thematically the same, though the instrumental range in London was in some instances 2 octaves higher than in The Beach. The next audio clip is London from the film The Ghost and Mrs Muir, followed by The Beach, found in Tender is the Night. This is another example of a cue being borrowed. However, here Herrmann borrowed not from a film score but from a concert piece. This shows that he borrowed pieces from different kinds of works and not just film scores. In conclusion, did Herrmann self borrow? Yes, Bernard Herrmann self-borrowed in several of his pieces. However, there is nothing wrong with self-borrowing. What made it so wrong was Herrmann's own negative perspective on the concept. He felt it did not make him stand out as a film score composer. Herrmann's film music was characterized not by easily remembered melodies or catchy title cuts, but by music that drew the audience closer to the images on the screen. Music that, in the composer's own words, can invest a scene with terror, grandeur, gaiety, or misery, propel narrative swiftly forward, or slow it down. When Herrmann started writing music for films, he avoided the overly romantic scores of the time, preferring to foster an individual expression that concentrated on atmosphere, sound, and which stimulated the subconscious to reach to the emotional turmoil of a fictional character. Though one might argue that the film music is by definition the music of exaggerated emotions, and that much of it is only successful within the context of the film, truly great film music is that which works as great music.